The tilt is real.
Tilt is real.
This is when the tilt is real.
Welcome to another episode of the Tilt is Real Fantasy Podcast. Coming to you live from the chef's table, here are your hosts, James Crease and Juan Pena.
Let's go. Welcome in to another episode of the Tilt is Real Fantasy Football Podcast. I am James Crease, and it is the 9th of June, episode 55, coming alive and live with me, as always, is Mr. Juan Carlos Pena. What's going on, big guy? How are you today?
I'm ecstatic, Chef. We made it to episode 55. You know, it's Wednesday. It's June. We are 92 days in a wake up away from real football. So it's a very exciting time, man.
Oh, yeah. And shout out to everybody that's in the chat. What's going on? Justin, in here before we
always
even start ripping off, my man. Much appreciated, as always. And then for all of you that are listening to this in podcast form, if you missed last week's episode, go hit us up. We broke down the NFC East, talked about some top fantasy targets from that division. Terry McLaurin, Saquon Barkley, Gibson. And if
the
you're
trio
listening,
of wide receivers in Dallas, we went through all of it.
And if you missed that, go back, hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, catch up in the real chat with us now. I mean, that's the ultimate plan, right?
Indeed. And Justin's got a good idea here. He's just starting to trash talk early. He's going to be in our fantasy league this year. And he said, bro, y'all going down in fantasy. I love the energy, man. I love the energy. I love it, especially on the episode Double Nickel. I'm feeling real Jordan Back to the Garden today. So I love that. Bring it, Justin.
Shout out to Justin, man.
Yes,
Justin, you are one of our most loyal fans, and we really do appreciate you, man. Really do. Today, we're going to be diving into the AFC South and discussing the fantasy relevance in those teams. Man, we got the Jags, Colts, Titans, and what's the other one there?
The Jaguars.
Yeah, the unforgotten, the forgotten team of the division. But hey, there may be some fantasy sleepers that we may want to touch on.
There absolutely are some fantasy, not sleepers, but really relevant players that we'll touch on that team. And Chef, this division feels a little bit like we did the NFC East last week, and we wanted to call it the NFC least, but they do have powerhouse fantasy players. I feel like this division is a little injury away in Tennessee, and Carson Wentz not getting better away from being that kind of division where 9-8 wins that division. You know what I mean? Like 10-7, like a mediocre football division, because the Titans defense was atrocious for all the weapons they have on offense. And we're going to dive deep into that. I feel like that team's was a candidate to regress.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, they did have the Tennessee Titans 11-5 last year. So that's something to look forward to. And we had some big news drop for the Tennessee Titans, and we're going to get into it right now with our weekly reel.
Keep it real.
It's the week. It's the weekly reel, presented by the Tilt is Real. It's the weekly reel. Let me hear the news.
That was the remix. I like it. the Chevy sounded like DJ Premier on that.
Oh yeah, was it lagging that bad?
Nah, it just stopped 2 times. It felt like you were scratching on a record. That's all.
Oh, cool. All right, kind of
cool.
like Julio Jones scratching his name in to the Tennessee Titans roster on their depth chart. Is he the number 2 or the number 1? Who knows? Only time will tell. But for sure, he is definitely on the Tennessee Titans. Traded officially. The deal officially got done on Monday. News broke on Sunday morning. I was out to breakfast with my wife, and I'm like, I got to jump on Twitter. Things are getting live real fast. And we find out that, he gets traded to the Titans for a 2022 second and a 2023 fourth rounder from Tennessee Titans.
Yeah, and Chef, also in that trade, that 2023 situation is a 6 for a fourth, so it's essentially a pick swap between the two teams. And Justin in the chat saying that he feels like the Falcons got nothing for Julio, and I agree with you, Justin. Not that they got nothing, but if they're successful, that's going to be a late second round pick and then a pick swap in 2023. So it feels like the Falcons were a little too desperate to get rid of him, and I think if they held out, they might have been able to get a bid from one of those teams that's in the playoff hunt, Kansas City, a Green Bay, somebody who thinks they have a shot, the 49ers, someone who has a shot, where it's a more value on a first round pick than what you got as a late second from the Tennessee Titans. So, I mean, kudos to the Titans for going out to get a future Hall of Famer for a second and essentially a pick swap.
Yeah, I mean, I think they got it done the right way. They dropped Corey Davis last year or at the end of this year to free agency, and they needed a number 2 on that team. And coincidentally enough, his jersey number is number 2 now.
I was hoping he was going to go with the Ocho, like Julio Ocho Jones. Sounds like a bad MFer name. Like that's a really good one, but hey, number 2, he didn't make AJ Brown give that up, because if AJ Brown's going to have a legacy and he wore 11 to kind of pay homage to Julio, like Julio knows it's going to be a 2-3 year window where he's on the Tennessee Titans. So just let AJ Brown have it, since he's going to be their franchise receiver for the time going, or for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. And of course, with Julio Jones leaving the Falcons, that makes Calvin Ridley. Oh, wait, I got some shout out to the chat. I'm sorry. Here, shout out to Antonio in the chat. He wants to know scratching a number 11. He says, Antonio in the chat wants to know, how does Jones going to Tennessee bump up Ryan Tannehill's value? And stay tuned, Antonio, because we were definitely going to get deep into that with our divisional breakdown on this episode. But for a little sneak peek, the arrow is pointed up for Ryan Tannehill, for sure. Helps out him more than anyone else, when you go from Corey Davis to Julio Jones. I mean, come on.
Yeah, it's an upgrade for sure.
But he had to leave the Falcons, okay? So what does that do to Calvin Ridley and the Falcons organization? I mean, that puts Calvin Ridley in the number 1 spot. But then today in the news, we hear that Calvin Ridley is not practicing during Falcons minicamp after undergoing a foot surgery. So according to NFL Network's Ian Rappaport, he described the procedure as minor. Ridley's Atlanta's new unquestioned number 1. We know this. But he apparently struggled through ankle and foot issues for much of the second half of last season. And now he's getting surgery now. Why wouldn't he do that before minicamp started?
Yeah, like right after the season would have been a good time if you're going to address any of those issues. And we saw it, Chef, that one game where Jair Alexander completely shut him down and he got blanked. He had no catches and he was laboring on that foot and the ankle, and he was starting to have those problems. So it's a little late, it feels like, for them to do this. But if he's going to slide into the Julio role, it's kind of like exactly what Julio does. Doesn't play too much during OTAs, doesn't do too much during minicamp, really doesn't do much in the preseason, and even sits out during practices during the regular season. So I feel like they're going to just slide Calvin Ridley right into that. Let's make sure he's good for game day week 1 instead of worrying about whether he's there to get timing with Matt Ryan, who he already has timing with. So I would say minor was the perfect word for them to use to describe this injury.
Perfectly said. I could agree with all of that. Just something to keep in the back of your mind when your drafts come up. Keep that news going for Calvin Ridley as we get closer to redraft this year. In other minicamp news, Joe Judge didn't give a timeline on Barkley's return from his ACL injury. Barkley has attacked rehab after the devastating early season ACL tear that ended his 3rd NFL season. But Judge said that the team is going to make sure that they take Saquon's rehab seriously. Slow is the way to go. I love cooking slow. Low and slow is the way to go on any good soup, stew, stock. It's the way to do it. And it kind of correlates to football and healing and rehab. If you rush an injury or rush a player back from injury, there's a higher risk of re-injury. So they want to make sure that their star, their focal point, as we discussed last week, is going to be 100%, but it may not be for week 1. So that's something else to keep an eye on as you're doing your drafts. And it may lower him a little bit, not much, but a little bit come draft season.
Yeah, Chef, this is another case where I feel like it's being cautious with a star that already knows the offense. No need to rush him back. Luckily, that injury did happen in the second week of last season. So it was early on in September. So I think it's a good target date. And we're starting the season like a couple days late. So it's going to be almost a calendar year exactly from when that injury happened. And I feel like Saquon being Saquon, he will be back by week 1. And I'm not scared to draft him 102. In redraft leagues, then one quarterback redraft leagues. I'm not scared to take him 102. I'm excited about that offense. They added Kenny Golladay and Kadarius Toney like we talked about last week. And sky's the limit for me for Saquon. And I'm not falling off the Saquon train. I'm not getting off.
Fair enough. I think he needs to do something this year. And we kind of talked about that a little bit last night. Like or last week rather, if he doesn't do what he did his rookie season this year or something close to it, he's going to start getting downgraded a little bit in rankings.
Yeah, that 5th-year option starts to come into question. Absolutely. If there's injury or any kind of fall off in performance, there's definitely going to be questions about that 5th-year option.
Yeah, because I mean, after the 2 seasons missing due to injury, that's always a question mark for organizations. They need to cash in while they can, and we know he's the focal point of their offense, but it's a business at the end of the day, and the reality is that he needs to get on the field and contribute as much as possible. One person that may not be contributing so quickly is Washington football team's Curtis Samuel is now out with a groin injury. Last week, Samuel sat out practice after feeling a twinge. A twinge? Is that what we say? A twinge?
A twinge.
In his groin. Hopefully he can get back to full health before July's training camp to solidify his spot at number 2 pass catcher. Now, this is coming from Ron Rivera, and Ron Rivera doesn't really hide too much about his players. He doesn't keep things close to the vest. He's pretty vocal with that. And with him coming out and saying Curtis Samuel should come back to being their number 2 pass catcher, this just limits some time with Ryan Fitzpatrick, and it's going to hurt the target share. And it just makes me want Terry McLaurin that much more for the simple fact that he's going to have all the time in minicamp with Terry McLaurin and Ryan Fitzpatrick together. So that makes me excited about that. But I'm sure Curtis Samuel being the veteran, he won't take too long to catch up with that offense, considering he was with Ron Rivera in Carolina.
Yeah, he's a physical freak who has a good athletic profile, and he should recover from it quickly. Again, this is the time of year to be cautious and not rush guys in. He can study the playbook. He already knows Scott Turner's offense, so he has an advantage over even Terry McLaurin, who that last year was his first year in that system, and Curtis Samuel already had that system implemented in Carolina. So they're both going to be okay. Both receivers will be somewhere between 6 and 20, probably 6 and 24 when it's all said and done, when the dust settles. And which one outperforms the other? Probably Terry McLaurin, but I'm not scared for Curtis Samuel either. All these injuries, Chef, I'm feeling real brave and real optimistic today in saying that most of them are precautionary sits and precautionary kind of like you twinge. Were you playing? If this was if the championship game was on Sunday, is a twinge keeping you out? Probably not. You're probably going to play with a twinge.
We're not tilting on the twinge of Curtis Samuel. We're rolling with it. He's going to be fine. All right, perfect. And one more piece of minicamp news. Minicamp was mandatory for quarterbacks. And guess who didn't show up there, Juan?
Yeah, Mr. Hawaii himself.
Yeah, Aaron Rodgers. And my probability meter now is up to 75% on him holding out. It was at 60% about a month ago, and now it's up there now. It was 70 about a couple weeks ago. Now this solidifies 75% holdout. I don't think they get anything done unless they get a trade done. And they don't want to do that. One side's holding out, the other side's holding out, and they both get thumbs down. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I'd like to give them both a thumbs down, Chef, but really quickly, I'm going to go on a little mini tirade, man. For the last 10 or 11 years, I'm the best quarterback you've ever seen. Before you saw Patrick Mahomes throw a football, the argument could be made that Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback you've ever seen. Forget about the Super Bowl, just one win and all that. He's better than Brett Favre. He carried that team and allowed them to build the team the way they do with just, I'm going to draft guys. We're not going to hire free agents. We're not going to overpay. We're going to be homegrown. You can do that. You have the luxury of doing that because you have Aaron freaking Rodgers on your team. So to not say, hey, Aaron, what do you think about this Jordan Love situation? You went up to get Jordan Love. So if you know something we don't know, go ahead and start Jordan Love then if you're the organization, and let Aaron Rodgers go and live and go somewhere else. This year, they went and said, hey, Mr. Brady, is it okay if we take Kyle Trask? He just got to Tampa. They built him a super team, gave him all the players that he wanted, and then asked him permission to draft Kyle Trask. Now, Rodgers isn't asking for all of that, but he might have been asking for, like, why didn't you get me Julio Jones? Like, why didn't you at least go to the man and give him the respect that he's due? Because he carried that franchise for the last decade.
Oh, man. Could you imagine Green Bay with Julio Jones on there?
Bro, exactly.
Wow.
Lethal.
And Antonio in the chat says, me being a Bears fan, I'm 100% okay with how Green Bay is handling this situation. I couldn't agree more, man. Yeah. I'm totally fine with it. I'm not particularly fond of Green Bay, and I think their time is up. I think they're very, very stubborn in their franchise, and it's going to come back and bite them, and that's the bottom line.
I think you're right about that. It is going to come back and bite them. Because he's a GOAT. Like, he may not be the GOAT, but he's in the conversation. You can't laugh somebody out of a room if they tell you that Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback they've ever seen. So,
yeah, for sure.
And all he really wanted was security. Sure. He just wanted to make sure that, beyond this season, that his future is safe. And Peter King came out recently, Chef, and reported a scenario where they let him play throughout this year, but void the last 2 years of his deal and guarantee him that he'll be traded to a team of his preference. Like, he can give them a list of teams to work with, and it gives them a year to try to negotiate a deal with another team. So that's an interesting scenario. And Peter King's somebody who I trust, who's been doing this for like 40 years. So if that report comes out, like, maybe that's something that they can do. Like, he can say, I'll come back and play for you this year, but I'm out after this season. And it gives them the time to bring up Jordan Love, who today came out and said that he'll be ready for week 1, which is, of course, what he's going to say. But they traded up to go get him. Maybe they're right. Maybe there's something there to him.
Yeah, add Blake Bortles. Put a star next to Blake Bortles as your watch list. I mean, because you know what? If they really had the confidence in Jordan Love to run that offense, they would have let him start, and they would have let Aaron Rodgers walk.
Yeah, I mean, he's under contract, so they can't let him walk, but they got to trade him. And I don't know how the numbers.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know.
And Antonio, you traded up to get him. Yeah, I'm sorry. And Antonio, if you're a Bears fan, I'm going to leak something real fast. June 30th, 6:30 p.m., we will be having on one of our great friends, Dave Kluge. He is a big-time Bears fan. He works for Football Guys. He writes on Fantasy Pros as well, and he is a ranker on Fantasy Pros. He is going to be joining us to break down the NFC North, and you won't want to miss that episode. He and Juan were on a podcast together way back. It seems like so long ago, Juan.
It does. It was back in like September or so at the beginning of the season, September, October. But it was by the numbers, and I've never met anyone who can break down numbers that way with, the analytics and all that stuff, but also understands football. And like Chef said, he's a Bears fan from the Chi. Like, he covers that team. He knows about that team inside and out. So if you're a Bears fan, definitely tune in for that episode. It's going to be fire. Dave's always bringing the fire. It's great.
Yeah, and we're bringing fire for the whole month of June, really, except for today. We have a slew of guests signed up. We have Jeff Bell, for whom Jay Bell tolls, coming in next week talking about the AFC East. And then we also have the one and only Cooter Doodle coming in to talk NFC South the following week, and then wrapped up the month with Dave Kluge. I can't wait. It's a great lineup, great friends of ours, friends of chaos. And that's how things are going right now.
It's going to be fantastic. We got a nice little slate going up to fill the summer. Like everybody else in the summer, it's, slow season, this and that, but we're ramping up right now. This is when we start to take off and kind of kick it into gear. So it's awesome.
No, yeah. It's redraft season, man. If you're not studying now, you're not preparing yourself to win. And the guys in the chat, no, they're here. They're listening to us. Yep. They're watching us. They're listening. And I'm watching the podcast listens. I have access to all that analysis, and people are listening. So kudos to those who are listening and taking our words. as they come, and just taking that information and running with it early on in the year. That's the whole point. You want to get as much information as possible before you reach your draft days. And it starts with us.
These guys are all champs, Chef, and they gave us a bunch of shout outs and they gave us thanks and all that stuff for giving them the information that they needed to get them over the top. But by the time they got to listening to us, a lot of them, they were already drafted. They had already taken their teams, and they watched your Waiver Wire Heroes show, and they watched us week to week, and they tuned into the Sunday Tilt, and we gave them start-sit decisions, but they already made a good team. So now they're going into this season, and they're going to have a lot more information than they did last year. So it's awesome to be a part of that.
Oh, speaking of waiver wires, I think I leaked that photo to you this past week. The graphic is already done. We will be adding on a fab percentage to that sheet this year. It's a little bit extra, information for you if you play in a fab bidding situation for your waivers. You know, they might be available, ownership, blah, blah, blah. But if you don't know how much to spend on a player, you could overpay and hurt your roster for the remaining time of the season. So that's, especially going longer this year, you're going to want to budget that fab budget a little bit tighter this year.
I dig it. But
enough of speaking of tightening, why don't we start tightening up and go right into the AFC South breakdown.
Let's do it.
We're going way down, way down, way down south. We're going way down, way down, way down. Then we work till we can't work no more. Then we drink till we ain't got no more. Then we lay down, lay down, lay down. We going way down.
All right, and we're going to start off right with Antonio's question. He says, how does Jones going to Tennessee bump up Ryan Tannehill's value? Now, I mean, we said it earlier in the top of the show, it's the obvious that they go from Corey Davis to Julio Jones. We have a better completion percentage. We have a better receiver in general, in my opinion.
Correct. I'll give you a fun little stat, Chef. Because of the way that that offense is already run, the way that it's Derrick Henry first, and we're going to run the ball. Julio Jones isn't a guy that has to be on the field 90% of snaps. Like in the last 2 seasons, he's been on the field for 90% of the snaps just 3 times. To put that in perspective, guys like Keenan Allen and DeAndre Hopkins have been on the field 23 times and 26 times in the last 2 years, 90% or more. So he's efficient when he's on the field. So if you have Derrick Henry and you time everything right, the play action game, the things that are going to be opened up, man coverage is going to be a must. Like you're going to have to try to man up on A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. Well, here's the news flash. A.J. Brown last year was number 1 in yards per route created against man coverage. You know, number 4 was Julio Jones. So now you have number 1 and number 4 in the NFL in created yards against man coverage, which you're going to see a ton of, because if you don't do that against Derrick Henry, he's going for 200. He already hit you for 2,027 last year. He's going to have a back-to-back 2,000-yard season if you don't crowd the box. And if you do crowd the box, I mean, pick your poison with that offense. So, yeah, Tannehill, sky's the limit for him as far as efficiency, and we'll see what happens with the touchdowns. He finished QB7 last year, if my memory serves. And so maybe he cracks the top 5 this year because of the efficiency of those 2 monsters on the outside.
I mean, he's sitting right now at ECR ranking of quarterback 11. I personally have him as quarterback 12. He's inside my top 12 as a quarterback. He has a little bit of a run floor. He can run the ball. We saw him run a couple touchdowns in last year. But those, you can't count those towards, your projections. You just can't. But the fact that they have an upgrade at wide receiver, it really helps. And like you said, I'll piggyback right off of that. It opens up things for Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry's going to be good. I mean, this offense as a whole is going to be good. I see a little bit of a downtick for A.J. Brown for the simple fact that Julio Jones is there. Right now, A.J. Brown going wide receiver number 4. I think it's a little too rich for my blood. I downgraded him in my rankings to wide receiver 11, and I have Julio at wide receiver 17. only because, he's going up against the top guys in the league. And if he does have Julio, and maybe I'm a little bit too low there, I still have him inside the top 12. And the top 12, you can interchange those guys. You never know who's going to be the one. Injuries happen, but I'm still going to credit him as a top 12 wide receiver this year in fantasy football.
Yeah, during last week's episode, or 2 weeks ago, I think it was, we had a hot take. It was 2 weeks ago where we had our hot take, and my hot take was that A.J. Brown was going to be the wide receiver 1. That was before the Julio signing and before all that happened. Now, do I still think that they could be A.B. Juju from a few years back? Yes, I absolutely think they do, because they're so efficient. Like, A.J. Brown had 12 less red zone targets than Calvin Ridley and Stephon Diggs and scored more touchdowns than both. So, like, A.J. Brown's a home run threat on every play. Julio's a home run threat on every play. And neither one of them has had the advantage of being on opposite sides of each other, where coverage is going to have to make a decision who they take away. And then that animal, Derrick Henry, in the backfield that commands 8 in the box. Like, Julio's never had that. All due respect to the knees of Todd Gurley last season and to Devontae Freeman in and out of the lineup before that previous. Julio's never played where the play action game was that real, where it was that effective. And if he's on one-on-one, again, number 1 against one-on-one coverage was A.J. Brown, and number 4 is Julio Jones. They're going to thrive. Sky's the limit. I can't bring A.J. Brown down. I had him number 1. I can't bring him down outside the top 6. And Julio at 17 feels slightly disrespectful, but you're probably going to be right, because he doesn't find the end zone as much. And they're going to pound it in with Derrick Henry, and he's going to get his 17 touchdowns again. And so I get that part of it. And he may not get the touchdowns to get him up into the top 12, but he's going to be highly relevant and highly efficient this season.
Well, Julio Jones doesn't really catch too many touchdown balls. So I think A.J. Brown and Henry get the workload of that. But there's also Anthony Firkser in the offense, who is going to be one of my tight end sleepers this year before the news of Julio Jones. And I was debating with myself with my rankings, Juan, on where to put Firkser now that Julio's there. I'm like, do I downgrade him? I'm like, let me really dig into the numbers real fast, because the numbers won't lie when it comes to target share. We know that they like to run the play action pass option with Tannehill. They utilize the tight end. We saw it with Jonnu Smith. We saw it with Firkser last year. He was a tight end 1 for 1 week. It was only 1 week, but still, him and Jonnu combined last year had over 115 targets. So even if he gets a portion of that, say 60% of those targets, I mean, you're talking 70, 80 targets, and with a completion percentage in the upper echelon of 70%, 75% completion percentage, I like Firkser as a low end kind of tight end. He's going at right now, I think he's going 25, tight end 25 on ECR. I mean, all right. So I ran the numbers. So if he gets 80 targets and he catches 60 of those targets, it's fair, right? 75%.
Absolutely.
75% catch percentage. Okay. That turns into 594 yards and 6 to 7 touchdowns. That equates to, what was it? Oh man, I'm stuttering here. I'm sputtering out of control.
No, you're not.
It turned into something like the fantasy projection, the fantasy production turned into like tight end 11 on the year.
I was going to say that's top 12 easy, what you just said. 60 catches.
It's like 193.7 fantasy points or something like that. Don't quote me on the number. But right after Kelsey, Kittle, Waller, everybody else is a crapshoot. Yes, there's more likely that, Hawkinson's going to do well or Fant's going to have a good year. But are you paying that price, or are you going to just wait and take Firkser and Irv Smith in the 13th and 14th round of your draft and plug them in week to week and hope they fall in the end zone and they get their touchdown? Because that's all that tight end matters. Robert Tonyan didn't light the world on fire. He had a few games where he had a bunch of touchdowns. So that's what makes the difference when you look at these tight end rankings after those top 3 or 4. Now, Kyle Pitts could be generational, hybrid wide receiver, tight end. You can move them in different spots in your fantasy lineup. Yes, if you want to bank on upside, I'm always going to be a proponent for go for the upside if you want to. But outside of Waller, Kittle, and Kelsey, I'm going to wait and take the likes of Anthony Firkser, banking on those 110 targets or 115 targets that you're talking about in Tennessee. And again,
Julio doesn't catch many touchdowns. You're going to have to worry about them. You're going to crowd the box. I can see him slipping out into the flat on a lot of play action plays and being wide open for touchdowns this season. And that's all you need out of a tight end.
It seems like he's almost like the Tyler Higbee of last year, this year.
Could be. Yeah.
And you know, you don't always have to go early on a tight end. And Justin hits us up in the chat and he goes, should I get a tight end early? If so, which round? To be honest, he prefers getting one early. And you're not wrong either way.
One of those three. Okay?
One of the top three, and then considerably like 3 or 4 rounds later, the other 2 in that conversation, or 4 or 3, if you want to throw Kyle Pitts in there in the top 6, the Andrews, the Hawkinson, and then maybe Pitts. And then Kyle Pitts. Yes. And then you kind of get into that tier of like the Noah Fant. Who else? Your good one? Evan Ingram, Jonnu Smith. You know, those kind of guys that are going to have good weeks, but aren't going to be relied on as a primary target in their offense from a week-to-week basis. So if you want to, especially in tight end premium leagues, if you play in a tight end premium league, yes, you go earlier on a tight end. I personally, I've never had a league where I've had Kittle, Waller, or Kelsey. I just don't do it. I find that there's less positional value available later in drafts for running backs and wide receivers. And I target running backs and wide receivers early. I don't really like to take a Kelsey and then try to pair him up with Mahomes. I just don't do it. That's just not my style or strategy.
I've gotten burned, Justin, a couple times on that by taking Kittle early, like especially last year that he was injured. But even if he weren't injured, you'd be better off with Cole Kmet, Adam Troutman, Anthony Ferguson, Chris Herndon, like any one of those guys, any 2 of those guys later on, and even through free agency, and just draft away at running back and hit the positions of need, that the ones that are really scarce. Because any one of these guys, Irv Smith Jr., like there's so many guys that could break out at tight end and could produce for you, and you just have to play the week-to-week game with those tight ends based on matchups, and you probably win most of those matchups if you come into the Sunday tilt, which you always do. So,
yeah, and it goes a good point where he posts his next comment. He says he hates waiting on tight end and QB, to be honest, like 3rd and 5th round in a 10-man league. So if you're in a 10-man league, I can understand getting a top tier quarterback earlier to beat out your competition. Yes.
If it's one of those 3, again.
If it's one of those 3. If it's not one of those 3 and it just doesn't fall to you that way, you have to wait. You think about it, the 10-man league, your waiver wire is a little bit more fruitful than it would be in a 12-man league. And those guys week to week, it's easier to play a waiver wire in a 10-man league than in a 12-man league. So in that particular situation, I would wait a little bit longer and stack up on an extra starting running back, an extra flex player. And unless you want to like double down, if you have Kelsey and Waller, then you play them as a flex option every week. Then that's something totally different. But yeah, I mean, pick your poison either way, but I don't want to get too far. We're going down a wormhole here on tight end strategy.
Not really. We're talking about the Tennessee Titans and Ferguson and his upside and how to draft tight end and you know how to approach it. And it's funny because doing this exercise for this episode, Chef, that's about it. Like, I don't want to talk about Tim Tebow. I don't know what the heck is happening in Indianapolis.
No, we don't.
And we're talking
about
Cox.
Is the Mo Alley Cox a thing?
Right. Is that what we're talking about? Unless they trade for Ertz tomorrow, like Anthony Ferguson's the best tight end in this division. Is it Kylie Waring? Like, are we talking about Darren Fells? Like, we're not, right? So it's Ferguson or bust out of this division. So we kind of covered the tight end scenario for the AFC South thoroughly right there.
I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, and we'll switch gears into Houston on that note. And man, yeah, there's no tight end worth Jordan Akins.
You know what I mean? Like, you're not doing that. You're not doing that. Right.
All right. Well, since we're on the subject now, what about Deshaun Watson? Now, we talked about late round quarterbacks. Is he worth pulling the trigger? He's falling. Now he is. Let's see where Watson is in ECR. Quarterback 31. Fading. He is fading. So if he's fading like that to the experts out there, would you mind pulling the trigger, or are you just going to let it go and not play that roll of the dice kind of game with Deshaun Watson this season due to his legal situation. He still has to do with the league. If there are any penalties involved or anything like that, personal conduct issues, that's going to affect his draft stock. I mean, his trade stock and his draft stock for that matter. And sitting at 31, I think I would as like a late round flyer. Hey, Deshaun Watson's still there in the 15th round. Sure. But I'm not going to pull a trigger on a guy that, it's a shame, has a top 4 upside when he is at 100%.
He was QB5 last year. He threw for 4,823 yards. He had 33 touchdowns to 7 interceptions, added a bunch more on the ground. Like, he's all world. He's a top 5 league winner type quarterback if he's on the field. But then again, what is the investigation going to bring in and all that? But I am, however, 100% not leaving any redraft league without Deshaun Watson. If he's still sitting there in the 13th, 14th, 15th round, I'm going to take a flyer, because at this point, we don't know what's going on. We don't know what's going to happen. That could all get pushed back. Sometimes civil suits and all that type of things, they take a year and a half to get resolved. So unless the NFL concludes some sort of investigation and comes down and levies a penalty that says he's suspended X amount of games, I'm drafting him 100 leagues out of 100 leagues. I'm already in a lot of leagues. Every league that I'm in, every best ball that I'm in, if you let him slide to me, I'm going to take him. There's quarterback 31. It's like, you know something I don't know. Because there's no way he slides out of the top 10. Like, who are you taking that has that kind of upside after QB 10 or 11? Like, there's nobody there that has Deshaun Watson upside.
And then to go along with Deshaun Watson, Brandon Cooks, wide receiver 32 right now. I have him as my wide receiver 37 due to the Watson situation. And to be honest, I don't see anybody else worth rostering, especially in redraft. And this is what we talk about. We talk about redraft. Correct. I don't see anybody else worth rostering in a redraft situation from this Houston Texans team outside Brandon Cooks, Deshaun Watson, if you want to take a dice roll, and then possibly a running back. I'm not sure. And Justin wants to know, he says he thinks Kiki is a big sleeper. So this brings up a good conversation. See, I love when our fans help out the show.
They always drive the show.
Yeah, they always drive the show. I don't think Kiki QT is the sleeper you're looking for, because Randall Cobb will be healthy this year. The sleeper you're looking for, if you're going to take a shot on a sleeper, it would be Nico Collins.
Big boy.
All
yes,
right?
Sir.
The big guy outside, kind of reminds me of Alshon Jeffrey a little bit. Maybe not Alshon Jeffrey.
Little Mike Williams.
Yeah. Mike Williams, field stretcher, bigger guy, contested catcher guy. That's someone I could float on a little bit. Tyrod might be throwing him the ball. Davis Mills might be throwing him the ball. We don't know the situation. But, I mean, I'm not taking a flyer on QT. I would rather wait on waivers and pick him up then, because I don't think he's going to get drafted anytime in your regular redraft leagues.
So real quick, like Brandon Cooks, like you said, he's going in the 30s, but he was wide receiver 17. And I know it's a step down from Watson to Tyrod, but it's not big enough to affect the number one receiver on a team and a guy with that kind of like physical gifts. I believe Brandon Cooks will still have a good year and finish somewhere as a wide receiver 2, maybe fringe wide receiver 3, but higher than 31 where he's being drafted. Love Nico Collins for the upside. Don't have a problem with him. QT is probably a fourth piece. Like you said, Randall Cobb will be the week in and week out guy, and he'll be there. But you have to remember, again, you're playing against the Jags twice. The Tennessee Titans defense was atrocious last year. So there are 4 games where Brandon Cooks can mess around and win you the week or win you that matchup. And that's all we play this thing for, is to win those matchups. So when you check the schedule and look down and say, all right, well, who's Brandon Cooks facing in weeks 15, 16, 17? And if there's a game in there against the Jags or the Titans, I'm going to start him, because Jack Rabbit Jenkins doesn't scare me on the Titans. I know they got a new addition and he's a new corner for them. He doesn't scare me. And Caleb Farley, for all his gifts, is a rookie corner. And we've seen them struggle like Henderson did last year for the Jaguars. So he's in his rookie in his second season. They don't have anyone else on those corners. So I like the Texans guys for spot starts. I'll use them a lot in dailies because they're probably going to be playing from behind, throwing the ball a ton. So a guy like Brandon Cooks will see a bunch of targets and have some big games against those two teams.
Just to put it in perspective, because I am working on my rankings right now, it'll be a constant thing throughout the summer as I start to move in a little bit on an expert level, I guess you want to say. I have Brandon Cooks right now as wide receiver 38, and this is half point PPR, but it's pretty similar to PPR, so we'll just leave it at that. Devontae Smith, I have him right behind him at 39. Would you rather have Brandon Cooks or Devonta Smith?
I think you're low on both, but I'd probably take Devontae Smith being on the better offense and the number one, I guess. I don't know. It's close between those two.
It's close.
But I would probably I haven't finished the wide receiver rankings yet, but if I do, I'd be hard pressed to leave guys that are the number one receiver on their team outside of the top 32. Like, if you're the number one on a team, I don't care how bad the offense is, you're going to be able to produce and give me something week in and week out. At least give me that opportunity. So I'll probably keep them inside the top 30. And I'd probably take Smith, and I would lean on Smith just by a little because I think I see Marvin Harrison, and I'm going to bank on my upside every time.
Would you rather have Devontae Smith or Devontae Parker?
Devontae Smith.
Brandon Cooks or Devontae Parker?
Brandon Cooks.
Fair enough. All right.
It's
so we're on the same page. We're close.
With Parker,
that's pretty good.
You're looking at this, and I feel like Will Fuller, who was when he went out wide receiver 6 at the time when he went out to the suspension, he's going to eat into it. So is Waddle. They're going to run the ball. We just want to win and play defense. We're going to be ahead. No need for Parker to gobble up targets like Cooks playing from behind with either Tyrod or Davis Mills, or even Deshaun Watson still coming from behind because their defense is atrocious. He's going to get more targets and more opportunities. So I'll take Cooks over Parker.
I like that. And for the record, I have Will Fuller over both of them.
Yes.
Brandon Cooks and Devontae Parker. That makes sense.
Yes. I like Will Fuller. Yes.
All right. And then just real fast, let's touch on this backfield because it is a mess. David Johnson, Phillip Lindsay, Mark Ingram, and now Rex Burkhead, all gross. All very, very gross.
Super gross. The only thing is, Chef, like, they're all gross, right? But David Johnson was number 21 last year, right? RB21. So first of all, the position is scarce and you need these guys. So RB21 feels pretty good, especially with the price you paid for him last year, David Johnson, where Chef, you got him in like the 7th, 8th, 9th round of a bunch of our leagues, right? So you stole. You basically got an RB2 in the 7th or 8th or 9th round. Right. 2 years ago, Mark Ingram was RB11. Phillip Lindsay was RB19. Like, so these guys are, and Phillip Lindsay was coming off back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons before Melvin Gordon came and he had some injuries and they had quarterback troubles in Denver last year. Like, he's a 1,000-yard runner. So who wins that job is going to be absolutely crucial. What kind of role they have. Like, that's a team that I'm really intrigued to see, as awful as they are. And they're probably going to be one of those teams that, is 3-14 with the new 17-game schedule. But fantasy-wise, they're going to be relevant. And which one of those three guys wins the lead role? David Johnson's going to get the passing work, we think, right?
Yeah, for sure. He's the pass catching back.
But does Mark Ingram vulture the touchdowns? Does Phillip Lindsay get the carries? And then David Johnson's just the third down guy. Like, what happens there is highly intriguing, and it's going to be super relevant to fantasy because much like James Robinson was on a bad team last year, nobody drafted him, and they took him late, and he made all the difference. And he was on more winning teams than almost anyone in the league last year. Championship winning teams had James Robinson. Somebody from this roster, I think, is going to be a highly owned fantasy roster player on championship teams. We just don't know who it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's a dice roll. It would be one of those late round running back additions to your team to pad to just fill in a bye week here or there, or just a depth piece, really, just in case. I think Ingram is going to be a waiver wire casualty. He's not going to be on a lot of starting rosters. Lindsay may see the same fate, but I'm seeing David Johnson going in drafts just later, like you said, around the 10th, 11th, maybe even the 12th round now. And just to rehab. Yeah, it's a value, but I mean, it's not much of a value because we don't know his production level. Last year, we could zero in on it a little bit more because he had Duke Johnson to compete with. Now he has two other, like you said, RB2 type running backs to compete with that are both still hungry. Ingram's still hungry. I think he's bitter from what happened in Baltimore. He got usurped by a rookie, and then they give Gus Edwards a contract, and Ingram gets left out in the cold after what he did for them. And then Lindsay, same kind of situation. They bring in Melvin Gordon. He was an undrafted free agent, man. He comes in playing with a chip on his shoulder for that reason. I believe if he has any chance of resurrecting his career, he's going to try to do it this season and take over the primary situation for the Texans. Unfortunately, it's the Texans. All right.
Yeah,
they don't have
you're
too
right.
many offensive weapons. If Watson plays, he is a running quarterback. He is a scrambler. So Lindsey will not be in the lineup for those scrambles. If Tyrod Taylor's the quarterback, you may see a little bit more Lindsey, a little bit more downhill running instead of the pass catching, dumping off to the pass catching back with Johnson. So that'll be a little intriguing as we go along. And just to catch up in the chat, Antonio wanted to know what round would you be okay drafting Deshaun Watson? I would say 15th, 16th round. I'm not pushing it any earlier than that as of right now.
As soon as I have my lineup set and I'm in the double digits, why not? I'm taking a flyer. Because here's the caveat. If I jump in early on a quarterback and I go, I jump out of my bridges and I take a quarterback early, then I won't double up and use a 10th or 11th round pick on Watson. But if I wait till 9, 10, 11 to draft my quarterback and I take someone who's a project or someone who may be coming up, like a Stafford or a Baker Mayfield or something along those lines, I'm going to take Watson in case he plays. Because if he does, I suddenly have a guy that should have been drafted in the 4th round, and I got him at 10, 11, 12 round value. So as soon as my team is set, I'm ready to pull the trigger on Deshaun Watson. Man, barring any news that we get from here till then.
I mean, I guess if you think about it that way, I kind of like it. Maybe the 13th, 14th round, like once your roster's set as your QB2, as long as it's a 1 QB league,
right?
I'm okay with taking him as my second QB.
That's what I mean. Like,
because there be other people on the waiver wire that you could pivot to on a bye week situation, depending on who my starter is.
If I have Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, if I have one of those guys, I'm not worried about it. You can have them. You can reach for them, and I'll take, a receiver that might yield me some kind of upside later. No problem. Take them. But if I waited and I took a rookie like Zach Wilson or, Justin Fields if he gets the starting job, or Trey Lance if he gets the starting job, if I take one of those guys, I'm going to hedge my bet on a rookie by taking like Joe Burrow coming off injury, Daniel Jones of Reclamation Project. Like if I ended up with Ryan Fitzpatrick because I didn't take a quarterback. I went 0 QB. I'm going to take Watson and hope that he pans out and he comes out and plays because again, he's going to be the biggest steal of any draft that he falls round 8 or later. If he falls to one of those places, he could be a steal.
Similar to what Cam Newton was for the first 4 weeks of the season last year. You were picking him up off the waiver wire late in drafts before the news came out, and then voila, he was, a QB, a top 10 QB for the first 4 weeks of the season until things went downhill.
Yeah. Well, gangbusters. He threw for 397 yards against the Seahawks that one game. Like he came out great. That was Julian Edelman's best game of his life. Yeah. But then, he fell off. But whatever, if he gives me a little something, even if Watson suddenly they're like, all right, you know what? The suspension's brought down. It was 16 games. Now it's 8 games. And then he comes back for you. That's the playoffs. Like he's coming in fresh. Yeah. Give me Deshaun Watson at the end for a playoff push for sure.
Fair enough. So, all right. So let's go from Watson to Wentz and kick it up a little bit with the Colts. Now, Carson Wentz coming over from the Eagles kind of lost his mojo there with Philadelphia, got caught up with a bad offensive line. He's reunited with Frank Reich, and we should see a little bit better. And I was doing some notes on the running back situation, their strength of schedule. Now, this is just unfair. The Colts, with one of the best offensive lines in football, one of the top tier premier running backs, Jonathan Taylor, coming into his sophomore season, they have the 4th easiest schedule for running backs this year.
Really?
Yes.
It's because they play
according to Fantasy Pros. Yes.
They play in the AFC South. The 2 games against the Jags, the 2 games against the Texans, and the 2 games against the Titans are above average matchups. Like you want to start Jonathan Taylor, who was running back 6 last year. You want to start him against those teams. So I can understand why the schedule broke out that way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's how it happens. It didn't happen that way for the Jaguars and the Texans, but it happened for the Colts.
Because the other two had to play the Colts. So, and the Colts are a really good defense. Right. Yeah, and the Colts are a really good defense. So, yeah, they have DeForest Buckner and Darius Leonard, and so they're going to be good. They're going to be fine on defense. But those Jags and Texans.
To get back to the Wentz thing, he joins in. He has T.Y. Hilton, Michael Pittman, Paris Campbell. Okay. Out of those three wide receivers for Wentz, who do you think is going to be his primary target this year?
Mo Alley Cox. It's Carson
like
Wentz.
Zach Ertz.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's Zach Ertz. They hurry up and trade him over there. I really don't know with these receivers. It feels like maybe there's a chance for a resurgence for Ty this season, but I don't see why it wouldn't be Michael Pittman with that big frame, that big body, the Alshon Jeffrey, if you will, of a couple years ago with Carson Wentz when he was thriving. Maybe it's Michael Pittman because of the size, but it's really a toss-up, and I don't really love any of those receivers. I understand the upside with Pittman. I love Paris Campbell's athletic profile, and Ty's history speaks for itself, but outside of the games against the Texans and the Jags, I don't want to start any of those receivers in fantasy this year.
So what it really comes down to then, they are all more of a waiver wire ad situation. I mean, I don't think Pittman is. Pittman's coming in at wide receiver 48. So 124 overall. That's the 11th round, 12th round of your drafts. And I think he's the highest out of all of them ranked right now via expert. T.Y. Hilton, he's a wide receiver 5 in my eyes. He's that extra at the end of your draft pickup that you could find some value at eventually.
We like
Campbell is interesting for me. Campbell is interesting because he's the guy that you can add later in drafts and not have to worry about it. You can add him on the waiver wire. He could be that Deshaun Watson type with the speed profile. He ran a 4.31 at the combine. He's fast. He's agile. He's got a burst score, 97% burst percentile and burst score. He can blow past defenders, just like Deshaun Jackson probably could once and upon a time when Wentz was the quarterback in the Eagles franchise. So why not bring some of that, open the field a little bit with Wentz? They kind of go hand in hand, in my eyes.
Yeah, what I'm hoping for is that offense. They did throw it 541 times last year, even though they had Phillip Rivers. Like, they still threw the ball a lot. They relied on the run enough to get, Jonathan Taylor 232 carries. So that's great, but not 300. They didn't overuse them. They get Marlon Mack back. I feel like they're going to go back to running the ball. And Ty was wide receiver 47 last year. So he's a wide receiver 5, you said. So yes, he's probably a wide receiver 4 or wide receiver 5 with certain matchups where you can play him. But he's the only one out of this group that averaged double digits per week in fantasy points, like when he was healthy. So he has a chance to be a wide receiver too. Again, this is probably one of those that we're going to have to monitor through the whole offseason to decide who we would choose out of these receivers. And I really don't like any of them. I'd rather have Nyheim Hines than any of these receivers.
I mean, if I were to pick anybody from this offense, it would obviously be Jonathan Taylor. That's who I really first and foremost want. I don't mind Wentz as a QB2, as a solid QB2 if you're getting them later in drafts, because Phillip Rivers was pretty fantasy relevant at some point last year. And Wentz is obviously a better talent in my eyes than Phillip Rivers.
Yeah.
If I had to pick one of these 3 wide receivers, it would definitely be Pittman, especially if they don't sign like we talked about Zach Ertz going there. That would definitely put a halt on my expectations for any of these wide receivers. But Pittman is similar to like an Alshon Jeffrey, like we talked about. Pittman 6'4", 225. Alshon was 215, 6'3". I think that is pretty similar in BMI, and I think it will lead to end zone looks for Pittman in his sophomore year. We didn't see it last year, but I have a feeling that Pittman and Wentz had a good conversation. They had that whole number swap jersey thing at the beginning of the year when Wentz came over after the trade. And I think they're going to build off of that. They're going to build some chemistry in the preseason and training camp. And I think Pittman's going to be your guy that you want to target in the wide receiver core coming out of Indianapolis this year.
I really like him to take a jump, Chef. And a lot of it is his father played in the NFL. He knows the league. It took a little while. He was a little banged up last year. A little bit of the different scheme where you saw it in the playoffs last year where they just pounded it with Jonathan Taylor at the goal line. I think there will be some fades thrown up to Pittman, and he will have some opportunities to get some touchdowns. The targets is what scares me a little bit because he had a low number last year. You don't know who's going to emerge out of this whole group. And At value, right now, the player of value on that entire offense is Nyheim Hines. 76 targets last year, and we're going to play an extra game this year, but he had 76 targets. He brought in 63 of them. They did use him a little bit on the ground as well. He had 89 carries for 380 yards and 3 touchdowns. So he did do pretty well, and he's the change of pace. He's the James White of that offense. He's that Darren Sproles of the old Eagles offense with Frank Reich. Like, you know what I mean? So he finished RB15. He's not being drafted in the top 24 of running backs. And
he's 47.
Unreal. And he was RB15. So I don't see any way where he's not RB30 or better. So it's, again, another guy where you can flex him depending on the matchup. You throw him in and you flex him. I feel like this whole division is a bunch of flex players. But yeah, you take him and you just you flex him here and there. You know what I mean? You just flex him in here or there depending on the matchup.
And fair enough. Let's flex on over to our last team that we want to talk about here in the AFC South division, and that is the Jacksonville Jaguars, a rebuilding team. They go out, get Trevor Lawrence with the 101 in this year's draft. What's his, predication, I guess, of this year? What do you expect from Trevor Lawrence in year one at the helm with Urban Meyer as the head coach?
I'm a little scared. I'm going to be completely honest. Everyone else is on the Trevor Lawrence's sunshine from Remember the Titans. He's the next coming. I haven't seen anyone since Andrew Luck. I haven't seen anyone since John Elway with this higher grade and everybody screaming. It scares me a little because every time we do that, the quarterback fails to live up to the expectations. I saw my own quarterback last year, Tua, come in and struggle because guys weren't as open as they were in Alabama. Now you're playing with, at some points, T. Higgins and Justin Ross, and Amari Rodgers. Like, you're playing with really good football players that are always open in a good system for Dabo Swinney. Most of the time, you're favored to win. Guys are wide open. It's the NFL. Guys aren't going to be that open. We've already seen them in training camp throwing interceptions and having a little bit of trouble in the red zone. That's not a great offensive line. Like you said, it's a rebuilding team. So do I like DJ Shark, Laviska Shenault, and Marvin Jones coming in? Do I like the weapons? Yes, James Robinson was a revelation last year. It's brought in Etienne. The weapons are in place. But how willing is he going to be to make throws to guys that are covered but are supposed to be open? And you have to make that throw. I'm a little hesitant on Trevor Lawrence and saying he's going to have a Burrow before he got hurt or Justin Herbert type of season last year. I'm a little hesitant until I see what that Urban Meyer offense looks like, because it could be really run heavy, Chef. Like, I feel like that could be one of those teams that wants to run it 50 times a game.
I mean, even if it is a run first offense, I don't mind that so much for Trevor Lawrence. He did run it in college. 231 rushing attempts in his collegiate career for almost 943 yards, 18 touchdowns, 8 last season in 10 games played. So if that's the case, we could be looking at a low yardage percentage when it comes to passing, but he could make up for it in the rushing game, especially around the goal line. Big body guy, just leap over and stretch out your arms. He's tall, man. The kid is huge. 6'6", 213. He's a big guy. And I think that's why he had so much hype around him, because of his size and his profile. I think he does okay. I'm not going to write him off yet, but yeah, you're right. He is more of a wait and see. He's my quarterback 20 right now in my rankings, which
fair.
Is I think is
it's
fair.
It's fair.
Yeah. I mean, he's going ECR right now. He's going 15, so that's a little too high for me.
Too high.
I have some other guys. I have some other guys ahead of him. Who do I have? Let me see. Let's play with this a little bit, because
while you look that up, I'm gonna ask myself, like, my own silly question. But if he's the one that's gonna get the goal line work, well, why is Tim Tebow there? Like, I thought that's why they brought him in. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, right. Like, you had James Robinson, who killed it last year and finished as the running back 7. Like, he was involved in every aspect of the game, ran the ball and caught the ball. Like, so you had him, and then you added Etienne. Laviska Shenault is one of those hybrid Deebo Samuel type weapons where you're going to give him jet sweeps maybe near the goal line. And he himself got a handful of touchdowns last year. So what exactly the offense looks like, I hope they're on Hard Knocks. Like, I hope that's the Hard Knocks team, because then it'll give us an inside look at what they kind of want to do with that offense and what the pecking order is going to be. Because if you had hopes for Colin Johnson and you like LaVisca and you love DJ Shark, well, why'd you go get Marvin Jones? And if you love James Robinson, well, why'd you draft Travis Etienne in the first round? So, like, there's more questions than answers on the Jacksonville Jaguars for me. So, yeah, I'm a bit lower than everybody else is on Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, I mean, he's a QB2 in my eyes, and at a low-end QB2 as of right now, until I see something. For redraft purposes, it's okay to wait a year. You don't have to throw your chips in. Like, you just don't know. Like, he could be the Justin Herbert of last year. You know, he was one of those 12th, 13th, 14th round quarterbacks. He just has a little bit more hype around him because he was the 101 like Joe Burrow was last year.
And he's been the 101 for a couple years. Like, they were tanking for Trevor, like they were tanking for Tua. The only thing he doesn't have is a Ryan Fitzpatrick and a hip injury in the way. So he's got a little bit more clout than Tua did going into last season. And there's a possibility that offense could explode. Like, the offense is built well. Like, they have the pieces in place to have a really potent offense.
And then we touched on a little bit James Robinson and Travis Etienne.
Huge.
It's going to be a big split in my eyes. Big split. I don't see James Robinson getting the pass catching work that he saw last year as much. I think Etienne kind of takes over that, and then later on in the season, we see Etienne getting more of the straight down touches. He is a 3-down back. We saw it in Clemson. So why would he be relegated to an RB2 role in that depth chart more than 4 or 5 games in his first year? In my eyes, anyway.
Just to keep him fresh, I guess, maybe, to bring him in slowly, bring him along slowly. But James Robinson had 60 targets last year, which is really good, and he brought in 49 of them. So he was an efficient pass-catching back, even though he ran the ball 240 times. He was a bell cow running back, and that's why he compiled good enough stats to make him the RB7. But I feel like, to your point, Chef, Etienne was built to be a 3-down back, has Kamara-like qualities, and in the right system and in the right offense, could be an instant RB1 candidate this year and usurp James Robinson completely. He could gobble him up. But again, we don't know what they're going to do and what that offense is going to look like and what the run-pass ratio is going to be. How slowly do you want to bring along Trevor Lawrence? Are you playing from behind because your defense is so bad? And are you forced to have Etienne on the field all the time? Then suddenly Etienne becomes even more valuable if you're just all the time playing from behind.
He's already more valuable in draft rankings. He's going RB27, James Robinson RB29 in drafts. And that's something that is a little interesting to me, that he already usurped Robinson in drafts. So experts are already on it. The secret is out. If you want Etienne on your team, like Etienne could be a valuable RB3 flex play for your fantasy team in 2021. You're going to have to pay some kind of capital for him now. He's not James Robinson of last year, that's for sure.
Yeah, the rookie hype is always real, and I'm a little hesitant to go out and redraft and go crazy drafting, Travis Etienne, because it could be a really bad offense. Like, it could just be an offense that doesn't work. It could be an offense that's, stagnant. You don't know what you're going to get out of that offense. But yeah, the upside is Etienne. The dynasty value, obviously Etienne, because of the draft stock, draft capital, and all that stuff. But I don't want to dismiss James Robinson altogether either. And if I can grab him at value, if you're going to let me get the RB7 from last year in the 20s, I'll absolutely jump on that. I won't let him get to RB20, I don't think.
Fair enough. And the way we draft, he would usually be our running back 3, running back 4 in that scenario anyway. So I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. All right, let's flip it over, and it'll be our last subject that we talk about tonight, Juan. DJ Chark, Marvin Jones, Laviska Shenault. We talked about, you mentioned how Trevor Lawrence had a little bit of a problem throwing interceptions in OTAs and kind of not hitting his stride yet. Yes, it's his first couple weeks with the team, first time trying out that new shoulder. He had the surgery, so I guess he may not want to push it too hard yet. Out of these 3 wide receivers, are any of them your go-to target when you're coming to fantasy drafts this year for redraft?
No. I love all three of them on face value. I love all three of them on their own. If I had more information, maybe. I loved Laviska Shenault until they said that they wanted to use Etienne out of the slot and they wanted to move him around. Like, that's going to eat into his value. Marvin Jones came off a season where he had 115 targets, but the guy he's replacing, Keelan Cole, had 88. So is he going to get 88 targets, or is he going to get 115 targets? Is he going to be wide receiver 18 like he was last year, or is he going to drop down into the 40s? Shark hasn't been healthy, but he's the one out of all of them that I will take. And because his value is going to be all right, like his value is going to stay low because people are worried about the injuries and all the things that I mentioned, he has that kind of upside where he could be a wide receiver 1. And if I can get him at high-end wide receiver 3 value, like draft capital wise, yes, I'm going to have DJ Shark on a lot of my teams this year.
Yeah, I'm looking at where Shark is going right now. He's going as wide receiver 29. So he's definitely available, 5th round type wide receiver where you can just pick him up and he could be your, wide receiver 2/wide receiver 3, depending on how you draft. I'm okay with that. I've gotten him in a bunch of best ball leagues. He's definitely one of my best ball guys.
Oh, yeah.
Early and often, he's going to be I think the primary target for Trevor Lawrence in that offense. And you know what? You kind of want the wide receiver 1, like you said earlier, you want the wide receiver 1 on any team for your fantasy team. You don't necessarily want the wide receiver 2 or 3. And I think that's a perfect case in point when it comes to the Jacksonville Jaguars. You don't want the 2 and 3 because there are so many question marks when it comes to Trevor Lawrence, when it comes to the running backs between Etienne and Robinson taking receptions away from these wide receivers. And then we don't know what the heck is going to go on with the tight ends. We'll throw Tim Tebow in a little bit. We'll throw Tyler Eifert in a little bit. They are going to get targets as well. We can't just say, oh, they're not going to get they're going to get 0 targets. No, they are going to get some kind of target. There's going to be some kind of play on the field where we even see James O'Shaughnessy go out and get a target. Okay, so, I mean, you can't say that these guys aren't going to have any targets for the season. Not to say that they're going to be relevant for fantasy, but it does take away the targets for Laviska Shenault, for Marvin Jones. I still like Viska more than Marvin Jones because he is that bigger guy. And if they decide to do some tricky plays where, okay, Laviska's going to run a jet sweep and carry the ball, that gives him a little bit more upside, maybe even around the goal line. Like we see them fake it to Tebow and Viska runs it in for a touchdown. I can see that happening on a trick play. We don't know what kind of offense Urban Meyer is going to be running. So it is a big question mark in Jacksonville, and it's going to take us more time and a little bit of training camp. But yeah, I hope they are the Hard Knocks.
They'd be a good one.
That definitely would be a good one this year. But man, Juan, that was awesome, dude. We broke down the AFC South.
Yes,
that was fun, man. That was great.
The dirty South. Yeah, it's always fun to break it down, Chef. And like to your point, like Laviska Shenault could be the Debo weapon, but why did Urban Meyer want Kadarius Toney so bad? Why wasn't he willing to just be in love with Laviska? Like, why did you need that other weapon? Why were you targeting him as one of your draft options? Why are you putting Etienne in the slot? I think even Urban Meyer doesn't know, and that's what makes for such an intriguing Hard Knock show if they're the ones that end up on it, and it would be really cool to watch.
Yeah, I think it's Urban Meyer, he doesn't have a 1-year deal either.
Right.
I mean, I don't know the length of his contract either. I'm just talking out my ear right now, but he's going to have some time. They know they are in a rebuild situation in Jacksonville, so they can pace themselves. Miami wasn't built in one day either. Before
right.
They were the bottom feeders of the AFC East, and it took some time. They went out and got some wide receivers. Then they got up some running backs. Well, maybe not some running backs. Man, Myles Gaskin, late round addition, 7th round add, undrafted free agents. They go out there and pick their poison. They get Mike Gesicki, and then they go out and draft Tua after their defense is already stacked up, rather. So I think they didn't really
the difference
target
is
any defenses in the draft, which I wish they had, and I'd be a little bit more optimistic for their fantasy outcome and their regular NFL outcome too.
Yeah, speaking of regular NFL outcome, from beginning to end, Justin's here, and he says Jags are going to be a fun team. Hot take, wild card. Well, the problem with that is to make a wild card, you got to play defense, and they really just don't have the pieces. You can only scheme so much because the division's so bad. Maybe you can steal both wins against Houston. Take one from the Titans, maybe. Take one from the Colts. They did it last year in the beginning with Gardner Minshew, so maybe. but I just don't see them winning 8, 9, 10 games to be able to get themselves into the playoffs. At least not this year, not with the roster as presently created or as presently rostered. I really don't see it for this season. But up and coming, yeah. Second year, sure. By the time they move to London in 2023, maybe. You know what I mean? Who knows? The London Jaguars might be a thing.
The London Jaguars.
Yeah.
I like it. All right. I think that's about it. Juan, that wraps it up. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Justin, Antonio, everybody else who joined us this evening. Thank you so much. If you're listening to this on podcast form, check us out Wednesdays, 6:30 Eastern Standard Time on our YouTube channel, The Tilt is Real, and or our Twitter feed at The Tilt is Real on Twitter. I am James Crease. You can find me at FF_chef on Twitter. Juan?
I am Juan Carlos Pena. You can find me at FF One of a Kind. And 92 Days Till Football. Mr. Swanson, you weren't here, but you're here in spirit every single episode.
Absolutely.
And we were talking about this yesterday, Chef, and we are 94 days and a wake up away from our first Sunday morning tilt. And I can't wait for that. We live for the tilts, and that's where we thrive and where we do our best work. So I can't wait for those to show up. Shout out to everyone who was in the chat with us. Justin, yes, I will personally help you with your draft. Hit me up. I will be glad to help you do any kind of draft you need to do this year. And I'm sure the chef is also willing to do it. So yeah, we would be honored to be able to help you draft your team and help you lift another trophy, because at the tilt, we're all champs, bro. We all have trophies, and it's awesome.
All right, guys. Until next time, thanks for choosing us for your fantasy football information, and we'll check out next week. Peace.
Peace.
Thanks for tuning in to the Tilt is Real Fantasy Podcast. Like and subscribe on YouTube and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Check out our website at thetiltisreal.com for more great fantasy football content. We'll catch you guys next time on The Tilt is Real.